Hey guys, sorry about a little bit of a late start here. I want to welcome you to the third in our three-part speaker session for Logansport Reimagine. We have a couple special guests with us today that Brian's going to introduce, but we're going to listen. We're going to have a panel. If you have questions, we're going to ask our presenters tonight. Then we're going to talk around the tables. And then I'm going to share what next steps look like because we shared with you about these three events. But you know, that'll be fine. But you probably were wondering what comes after tonight, so we want to share that with you later this evening. So I'm going to have Brian introduce our speakers, and then we're going to get started for the night.
Thanks, Zach. So I'll keep this short and sweet because they're going to talk a little bit more about themselves as they get started here. But very happy to have us tonight to talk about project implementation. So if you recall, we started this journey with discussion about kind of the why and the what of placemaking and neighborhood development. And then we transitioned into last week talking about creative ways to engage community, especially at the grassroots level. And so tonight, again, talking about how you take those steps and turn them into actual action deliverables, projects that can be completed and accomplished. So we're happy to have a couple folks from up the river in Wabash, here to talk about some of the great things they're doing there. I think it's appropriate, in part because one of your questions at their table is, what is your favorite community to visit and what makes it uniquely better? So, you know, definitely fill that out as you see fit, but I venture to guess some of you might say Wabash because of some of the wonderful things they have there. So tonight we have Christine Floor from Visit Wabash, their tourism office that promotes the great city. And then also Todd Minnick with the Honeywell Foundation. So they're going to share some of their insights with us, and like Zach said, we're going to have some question and answers and from him and from all of you. If you have any questions, make sure you let us know later. So I'm going to turn it over to Christine and to Todd. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Brian. I'm glad to be here. Thanks. So we're glad to be here. We're going to share about the Wabash experience, and we know that you're not looking to replicate Wabash or any of the other communities you're studying, but really trying to figure out what makes Logansport unique and capitalize on that, and we would agree that's the right approach. Just a show of hands, how many people have been to Wabash? Virtually everybody, great. So that'll save us a few slides. Just a little, we're going to provide some background, and then there's a moderated discussion, and then we'll take questions from the audience, and then we'll be around for a little while if you have other questions too. You are going to hear some themes today about cooperation, about leadership, and about timing and luck, or more maybe appropriately titled preparation and capacity. So jumping in, Christine Floor. Introduce yourself today.
Sure. Like Brian said, I'm the Director of Tourism for Wabash County, and it's really thrilling to see so many people here wanting to engage their own community. We'll talk a little bit more about the history of how we got to where we are and some of the things that you've maybe seen and the changes you've seen in Wabash through your visits. Of course, my primary role is to market the county as a whole via its assets. Todd likes to say he's probably oversees one of our largest assets, the Honeywell Center, but he also oversees a lot of other properties as well, but it's one of our key tourism drivers in the county. And so I've been in this capacity for just over 6 years, nearing closer to 7. And I love what I do, and I love the work that's being accomplished, and it's through planning like this that starts conversations. I think that tonight will be hopefully very helpful for you, and hopefully you can learn from maybe any of our mistakes and some of our successes.
And Christine is one of the key leaders and leads one of the key organizations that's made a difference in our community. Just a little background, again, Todd Minnick. I run the Honeywell Foundation, which runs the Honeywell Center and a number of other properties in Wabash. I'm an Indiana native. I spent some time in Chicago and then a decade on Music Row and 4 years in Manhattan before moving back to Indiana. And when I came back, Wabash was not at the place it is now. If any of you remember Wabash 15 years ago, it was kind of on its way down, and then we kind of bottomed out and have made the turn. And in the last 10 years, it's kind of gone from one of the worst examples of a community in rural Indiana to one of kind of the best models for things that are happening. And again, some of that was timing and luck, some of it was the work of a lot of different people really pushing to make a difference. We're going to just take you through a quick background. You know where Wabash is in relationship to the rest of kind of the larger metropolitan areas in Indiana. Just a quick stats, we're a town of 10,000 and a county of 32, which is a little smaller than what you're working with, but kind of in the same ballpark. We lost a decade ago a major employer in town that kind of changed the landscape of town, 800 people out of work. And that's really where we hit the bottom in 2007. If you remember, the economy was not good in 2008. It was a really challenging time. And so Wabash was really focused on turning things around and looked at quality of place. How were we going to be competitive when we were going through the same downturn that every other small town in rural America was going through? And Stellar, I'm sure everybody here is familiar with the Stellar Communities program. Wabash applied in 2013 and was not a successful bid. But what it did was brought the entire community together to really work together toward a common goal and a common plan. Wasn't necessarily an easy process or always a smooth process, but it was a great process that we felt like winners, even though we didn't succeed that first time, because people were working together in a way they never worked together before. When I first moved to the community, I was surprised at really the level of dysfunction in Wabash, and people just didn't share a vision, and people that should be working together toward common goals were working against each other. And I just found that surprising and disappointing. And over the years, that has changed dramatically. A few years after I arrived, a new mayor came in, and it wasn't that the other mayor wasn't good, but the new mayor really, he made everybody work together, and he used his words and his checkbook to do it. And really preached that theme of working together and cooperation. And over time, was successful. And in 2014, we reapplied, and we're successful. I believe even without the money that came with Stellar, and it wasn't near as much money as we thought it was going to be, that we would have continued on with that planning because people believed in it, were working together. Another program in Northeast Indiana, the Northeast Indiana Regional Partnership, I was impressed that we got our town and then our county to work together, but the thought of getting 11 counties to work together for a common economic development goal seemed pretty far-fetched, and yet now that's happening in our region. And again, it just comes down to that partnership and people getting together for a common goal. We realize what's good for one community is probably good for all the communities around us. A little background on Honeywell. We are fortunate it was Mark Honeywell's hometown, and so he did leave his personal wealth to build the Honeywell Center and money to operate the Honeywell Center. And over the years, the town's been fortunate. About 26 years ago now, 1994, I guess the Honeywell Center did a major addition with private funding, building on what Mr. Honeywell had left. But we recognize that's a defining characteristic of Wabash. We're not a community that tried to manufacture an arts and culture environment. We're a community that has one that goes back 75 years, and so we've continued to build on that. Wabash is an arts community. Again, we didn't manufacture it. We're building on it and looking at other ways that we can really leverage that asset in our community. So looking at what's changed in the years, I'll turn it over to Christine to walk us through tourism and some of the other wins for Wabash.
And so Todd talked a little bit about the Honeywell Center. Yes, it's a great asset. However, there were numerous years, especially when Todd first came to town, where a lot of people came to the Honeywell Center and they left. They weren't staying and spending time there. We didn't have a quality of place. We were inviting people, as Todd would say to his team and says to this day, we're not selling the first experience, we're selling the second and the third and the fourth, and hopefully they consider moving their business here or moving their family here, etc. And so through growth and through change, and the reason why we're sharing all of this with you is You know, we hit some bumps. We are still riding out some of those bumps, but there is really measurable growth. And you can see just from tourism spending, I don't know if any of you have ever looked at the economic impact of tourism in your area, but the report is very, very valuable. We actually partner on a co-op purchase with the state of Indiana to have this report done annually. And you can just see where visitor spending back in 2013 was just over $41 million. And then you can see where our ranking has continually increased higher up of the 92 counties. And in 2016, our tourism spending was over $51 million. Tourism spending is really important. What it does is it's bringing bonus dollars into your community. It helps offset the cost of the taxes. Tax levies for Wabash is right around $500 a person that lives there. And that money that comes in gets recycled right back into the community. These are people who are coming here, even if it's as simple as buying fuel. That's extra money that's coming into your community. Tourism spending is really important. And we know people are coming and staying longer because the tourism spending continues to increase. And along with being a stellar community designation in 2014, 2015 we're an America's Best Communities finalist. We're not bragging, what we're telling you is by putting together planning, working through the stellar project, it set us up for some other future successes. We didn't win America's Best Communities, but we're finalists. But in 2016, we were selected as Small Business Revolution Season 1 winner. Are any of you familiar with Small Business Revolution program at all? Just a quick show of hands. Anybody watch any of those? So I encourage you to do that. It's a series dedicated to small towns, small business owners, and the struggles that they have. The program is championed by Deluxe Corporation. Us winning that contest, we had to nominate ourselves and ended up having some online voting take place. But what that did was it got us to a national audience. We had over 501 million impressions. If any of you work in the world of marketing, can do all the marketing I want, and it'll be a long time before I alone can hit 501 million impressions. Another piece that we really worked on was telling our community story. So we put together a comprehensive visitor guide. It's an 82-page magazine that tells our story. A long time ago, there used to be 4 different publications that used to represent our community. So our Chamber of Commerce, our Wabash County Chamber of Commerce did a guide. Our tourism office did a 3-panel brochure. The North Manchester Chamber of Commerce did a guide, and our Economic Development Office did a guide. All of those pieces didn't tell a cohesive story. And so one of the things we collaborated on was making sure that we leveraged our resources to produce one quality marketing piece that all of us could use as a promotional tool. Just quickly, we've had some really great mentions. The Wall Street Journal was curious, like you, what is Wabash doing located in the middle of the Rust Belt to recover? And we are continually doing what you're doing now. That's what has moved the needle. That is what helps change the direction that we're moving in by recognizing our assets.
So, Wabash Marketplace is our Main Street organization. I assume there's a Main Street organization here in town. Yeah. And so, the Main Street organization, I guess close to a decade ago now, really put together a plan for, at the time it was called Public Art. It's since migrated to creative placemaking, and 5 years from now they'll probably call it something else. But it all really means the same thing. And for us, there were those that said, oh, put up a sculpture, or put up a piece of public art, or paint a mural, or somebody wanted to put up signs on each end of downtown that said Arts District. And they came very close to doing it. The thing that they didn't realize is that the Honeywell Center, the primary magnet arts property downtown, was outside the district. And on the other end, the county museum was outside of the district. So we really pushed to change the thinking that it's not about putting up a sign, it's not about a quick fix. It took about 3 years to get the plan together, I think. We did site visits to other communities. We sat in the audience where you're sitting now and listened to people talk about what they'd done, took all that information, put it into a comprehensive plan. so that the next time a grant opportunity became available, we were ready to apply. We had all the materials together. To date, I think over now $250,000 of funding has been put into these projects. Phase 1 was complete. Phase 2, I think, is close to complete, and there's additional planning. But it was really something in the beginning where, and I worked on that committee. We were the joke committee for a while. Everybody wondered what we were doing. But we played that slow and steady race, making sure that we had a plan and that it was a good plan. It was a plan that would work because it was a plan that had worked in other communities, drafted specifically for us. And again, just the impact of arts on downtown, again, we've tried to know who we are and build on that. I'd love to tell you that everything that happened in Wabash was highly planned. A lot of what happened was about building a plan and then seeing what else happened. A lot of what was in the plan happened as planned, but because we had the capacity, other things came up. We applied for Stellar and didn't get it. We applied for Stellar and did. We applied for America's Best Communities, and we could say we were a quarterfinalist, but the reality is we just lost. But it prepared us for Small Business Revolution because there was this team of people like you in the room that continued to work for the good. And we tried some ideas that failed. We tried some things that didn't make the cut. We tried some things that led to other things over time. As a cornerstone of the not only Stellar Communities, but now we've received money from the Northeast Indiana Regional Partnership, Regional Cities, a complete renovation of Eagles Theater downtown, which is a Honeywell Foundation project, but it really a point of pride for the whole community. Again, building on what we already do and do well. So that's a quick walk through a variety of projects that have happened and that both Christine and I have been involved in. Again, pretty quick walk through. I know that we've got questions and things to talk about. You know, our goal here though is to really provide something that's meaningful to you that you might be able to take away in the way that we were able to learn from others. So
that was the big thing when Tom and I were brainstorming, sitting before all of you, is you start to feel kind of braggy when you're saying, we did this and we did this, but we have a lot of scrapes, bumps, and bruises along the way, and our biggest goal was to make sure we answered the questions that you have so that you can take this back and put it into action, which is what we want to do, is like Todd said, we want all communities around it. A rising tide lifts all boats. And so we want Logansport to be that neighbor that we also can share success stories about and with too.
So you guys can be thinking of questions. We have several that we had come up with beforehand to ask these folks, and then we'll kind of open it up. But before we get to the list that you have, just a few that as I was listening, one of the things you just mentioned was like being recognized nationally. Logansport was just recognized by Realtor.com like the #1 small community. And people hear that, and I'm sure people heard some of the recognition you got, and it's nice to be nationally recognized, but sometimes locals don't get it. Like, they're not proud of living in Wabash. They're saying, well, it's great that Richard came here and did all this stuff, but I live here and I'm not seeing the good, or I'm not seeing the change. So how do you deal with that disconnect? Because I think we all feel it, where we're recognized and we're in these great articles and they take great pictures, but people that live there say, well, I don't really see how this is affecting me. Does that make sense? Like, so how do you walk people through? How do you help people see? We talked about this beforehand with outsider eyes, some of the cool things that are happening.
Yeah, that's a great question and great issue, and we face that in many ways. Our economic development director used to always have something good to say. The year that we lost 800 jobs, he was telling stories about the next business coming to town. And eventually one of those did come through, but he always had something positive to say. It was a choice. The mayor encouraged people to work together and was always looking even when things were dark. One of the, I guess, pivotal points for me was Charlie Creek Inn downtown is a hotel, if you don't know it. It was a $15 or $16 million renovation of what was kind of an eyesore and a bit of a heroin flop house, unfortunately, downtown. That turned into a very nice boutique hotel and restaurant. And across the street, Honeywell Foundation had just acquired Eagles Theater, and put all new light bulbs in the marquee, and it was bright and shiny, and it was a Thursday night, and I was at Charlie Creek having a drink at the bar, and the lights were shining because we had a blues concert that night. And one of the guests there asked the bartender, "Hey, what's going on in Wabash?" And the answer was, "Well, I don't know, there's never anything going on here." And so you ask how you address that. I probably didn't address it very politely, but I did introduce myself to the gentleman and tell him about the great thing going on across the street. And then I had a conversation with the general manager of the hotel to say, unacceptable. Train your people better. This is unacceptable. You're always going to have people that see the other side of the coin. But for us, we took a pretty proactive, I know, the tourism office, we talked about training programs, what could we do, and really just those that had things positive to say, said them louder and more often. We still have naysayers in our community, less so than most, I think, but we still battle that on a pretty regular basis. You have to keep your eye on the focus and not really engage in people that aren't moving it forward. I guess to the other question of, you've always lived somewhere, you tend to see it through one lens, and so how do you get people to see things through a different lens? And I think that's a part of telling the story. There were a lot of people that told the story. We made sure tourism tells the story, not only to people from outside of town, but people locally. We spend a lot of time trying to message and make sure people see that.
And to piggyback that, so everybody likes a winning team, right? So when we started on projects, there was just a handful, less than that's in this room, that started to dream big, started to put together these ideas that could be accomplished, not thinking, what if we can, but thinking, what if we could, and how do we do it? And through each small project, medium-sized project, another small project, what started to happen is the culture started to shift. People have a relationship with the place that they live. We choose to stay here. And so you start to have this sense of pride that just naturally starts to build. Everybody likes that winning team. So each time you have that win on a project, keep the conversations positive, and you'll start to just feel the energy and the tide change. And it's naturally what will happen. So don't be discouraged. Keep doing the work. Don't combat those individuals. They'll either come along and be a part of the movement, or they're going to choose to stay where they are, and that's okay. Maybe that's better that they stay where they are. But those who are contributors maybe don't see it yet. If they have the heart and the goal and the want to, they will. They will.
And I would say celebrate the wins. There were a lot of, we talked about a lot of kind of the big wins. There were a lot of small wins before there were big wins.
I mean, we had a party when we put in bike racks. You celebrate the little
win.
Every single
Trash
win.
cans.
Can you share some, so trash cans, bike racks, what were some other of the small ones that come to mind that were some of the kind of the projects that started us thinking bigger and collaborating together, the things that grassroots people in this room can be involved in that might not be massive funding, but it's things that started changing the tide? Can you think of others?
When the conversations where you're starting to those dreams, and you start wanting to put things in place, the question was asked, do we paint more murals? These random pieces. And what we realized, and I'll kick it back to Todd, was our community wasn't ready to start putting in those pieces because we didn't have the fundamental pieces.
Yeah, again, I think it's about, having a plan, even if the plan involves putting in bike racks or benches or trash cans downtown. And that was a plan. I was on the Main Street board for about 7 years of talking about trash cans downtown. And so, sometimes I think that was too long to talk about trash cans, but that's just where we were at the time,
But talk more about that, because I've heard that theme come up, and maybe you guys have as well. It seems like, you've learned, but the pace you seem to understand, you can't go too quick or too slow. How did you, is that just trial and error? And you kind of learn as you have speed bumps, but saying like, it takes time. We could have just put up all these murals, but we said, wait, we should slow down. But then everyone's saying, well, we want action. We want to see these wins. Like, how have you paced yourself making good plans, but then actually doing things so it's not just plans on shelves that everyone's like, hey, we have a great plan. Well, what are we doing?
Community preparation was key. That goes back to we didn't have a place. We wanted people to come into our community and stay and hang out in our community, or are they going to sit Indian style on the sidewalk? And so we recognized that some of our sidewalks were bad, and some of our sidewalks were trip hazards. And so we started with, the foundation and built up. Our community wasn't ready for some of those big ideas because we didn't have trash cans. We didn't have benches. We have a trail network that's a cultural trail that's pedestrian friendly. We have a walking trail right along the river that people can bike and hike and jog and push baby strollers. But we didn't have places for people to ride their bikes on into town and, chain them or lean them against something to go in and grab a coffee or shop. And so started with community preparation and then led into building off of that in phases. But when Todd says that the plan was long and hard, it was because they spent a lot of time visiting other areas that were doing it really well and looked at things that we could adapt that made sense in our community. And so that's where we identified, and then by phasing it, and by having conversations about identifying what is realistic priorities.
You can't do anything without money, or not much. And so ideas are great, but if you don't have the funding, and so one of the keys to the things that led to actual purchase of benches and bike racks was to have a plan in place. And so that was one of the early phases of the public art plan. You don't think of benches and trash cans as public art, but it's really about creative placemaking. If you want people to hang out, you have to have those basic amenities and try to create a sense of space. But having the plan allowed us the next time Okra had a grant opportunity available, and the turnaround times on those are sometimes pretty quick. We didn't have to go out and figure out what applied. We had a plan in place that met all their criteria. We could fill out the application, turn in this well-researched plan, and we felt confident that we could find the match money for that. And so that's how it started, and there've been a couple of grant cycles like that because we were ready the next time because the committee had already written phase 2 of that plan.
So I'm hearing being proactive, not reactive, like planning ahead, thinking, yeah.
I will also just add on to because it's important too, and this all does come together. With the creative placemaking plan that Todd's alluded to, our art plan, public art plan, that was housed within the Main Street organization. But that doesn't mean that the Main Street organization was running rogue on its own and the rest of the stakeholders in the community weren't paying attention and collaborating. Lots and lots of conversations took place and continue to take place with leadership. So not only was Wabash Marketplace spearheading some of their creative placemaking plans because it was relevant to their Main Street area, conversations with the city in regard to the city's strategic plan and how does creative placemaking overlap, supplement, how do those two plans talk to each other? How does the tourism investment plan addressing gateways and some signage options, how does that fold into those plans? And so in our economic development office, as they're looking to recruit, what are priorities for industry businesses? So one organization isn't working on an island doing what they want to do. Multiple organizations are working on plans that meet their mission, but lying them on top of each other like a stack of transparencies to see how we each can leverage our resources, work together, and help uplift one another. Does that make sense? I just want
Some
to
of
make
you
it
young
clear.
people, a transparency is what we
Oh yeah, I just dated myself.
I probably have someone in the
Real
church, let's be
quick,
honest, there's
real
probably
quick.
3 in one.
Pretty powerful.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, but so a lot about leaders and organizations, like how about the rest of the community? Like sometimes there's divides in communities like ours where there's like the power brokers who are making these plans behind closed doors and the rest of the community doesn't feel like they're involved until, like how did you get that feedback? Last week we talked a little bit about creative engagement, but how did you get other, like not the big stakeholders but the grassroots involved to kind of see the value in it or share their opinions and ideas? Were there ways that Wabash did that? I know you have, but can you share some of those with us? Because some of us in this room, like myself, Like I'm not in one of those leadership positions. I'm just a guy who loves Logansport and lives here. So what can I do, or how do I get involved in some of those things?
Yeah, I would say for our Main Street organization, it was mostly people in your position. There were some other area leaders involved, but it was people like you and people in this room. It didn't come out of a closed circle of people, and if others wanted to be involved, there was a very open door. It was a different place than I moved to 15 years before. People were very welcoming. There was probably something frustrating for some people to spend so much time trying to plan to make sure you had the right plan. There were those that just wanted to go do something, hang those Arts District signs up and feel like they accomplished something. But really building a plan and then being able to work that plan. There are always going to be people that don't get it or want to sit on the sidelines and complain, and I just think you have to ignore those people. And that's probably not the politically correct answer, but there are just some people who are never going to come along with the plan. And if you spend your time trying to battle them, you're not going to win. I think what you want to do is make sure that you have a welcoming environment where people that want to participate can participate, and people that don't want to participate but believe in what you're doing, that there's information flow, that you tell your story. We tell and tell and tell and tell our story, and we try to celebrate it. We try to invite everybody to that celebration. And then you just have to learn to ignore the negative voices. You can listen, and if there's value, modify your plan, and if there's not, move forward.
A lot of it's volunteer too. That's your grassroots. You know, Marketplace might have a board of directors and might be a Main Street organization, but they have 80 volunteers that serve that organization in one capacity or another that never step foot around the boardroom table. And so volunteer opportunities, you can have volunteers. One of the things I learned from Todd over the years is there's lots and lots and lots of really good ideas, but you have to go after the great ones. And sometimes it's really hard to have to tell somebody that their idea is really good, but it's not one of the great ones, so you can assemble your stories. But through volunteerism and the community, that's the best way to get your community engagement. But you do have to have some decision makers. If you wait for a committee of 900 to try to make a decision, you're going to come up with a lot of really good ideas, but at the end of the day, there has to be one or a handful or a core group of drivers. They're going to identify what can be done, what needs to be done, and then those volunteers hopefully come along to help get it done. They help put the sweat equity into it.
Exactly. You guys haven't used the word silo and sandbox, although you kind of talked around those terms, because I bet you're sick of those two words. But could you talk a little bit about the cultural change and interpersonal and interorganizational dynamic that happened as a result of the process? I mean, because I think that's the greater benefit then, because it's really easy to get fixed on construction projects. Can you talk about that softer side of things a little bit? Because I think that's a big message you need to make sure you emphasize.
I'll take a pass. So when I came to the Honeywell Foundation, and I came from an organization that only had 12 employees scattered in 3 different cities across 5 operating divisions. So we were offices of 1, 2, and 3. We worked together. That's all I knew. When I came to Honeywell, and I did not inherit the job at a good time in Honeywell's history, we had 5 different rates at the local newspaper because I had 5 different people that would buy and couldn't work together within my organization. So we had some silos, and I'm not a big fan of silos, and I had direct ability to change the silos there. We talked about community not working together. We had silos. It took leaders at the top positions of those organizations to change that. And it took people that weren't in the top positions in those organizations to demand and expect change. And Christine and I have known each other a long time. She was one of the first people that I hired, and she worked at Honeywell for a number of years. So she knows those years in our organization, and I used to say I just have a low tolerance for incompetence. That's really the only asset I have. I want things to be good, and when they're not good, it bothers me. And so I'm a driver. I push. I push hard. I try to push a lot more politely than the New Yorker in me used to push. But if you expect better, ask for better. Expect better. Talk to people. Work with people. Change isn't always easy, and there are a lot of different ways to break down silos. I could break down the ones at Honeywell through direct change. The ones in the community, I had to talk to people and ask questions and encourage and try to see opportunities and show opportunities in other areas. And it wasn't always a quick change, and it's not always quick, and some things didn't change, but we focused on the things we could change. To the good idea, great idea concept, we focused on things where we really could have an impact. No sense continuing to try to do this if it's impossible when you can go do this and have an accomplishment. And over time, things that were further down on that list that were harder or more complex are things that we're able to tackle now. In the beginning, we really looked for the things that we could change. And it came down to people, it comes down to leaders, it comes down to being able to work with your friends and neighbors.
And to echo that, starting conversations like you're having now with one another, you start having that feeling of being competitive. So instead of hoarding information, hoarding knowledge, hoarding plans, hoarding grant information or funding opportunities, you see what opportunities lie. And sometimes, you know, one of the first grants that our Main Street organization applied for and received was a grant that I had found out of the Indiana Office of Tourism. And so knowing that the work that could be done through creative placemaking was something that our Main Street organization was wanting to accomplish, I sent the grant over to our Main Street and then helped write the grant, was a funding partner, but allowed the win, and I use quotation marks, to come to our Main Street organization. Because we stopped being competitive. We didn't look at a feather in my cap or a feather in Todd's cap. It was a feather in all of our caps anytime something was accomplished. It's the same when the Eagles Theater received funding from the regional cities. There wasn't a competitive nature in that. That's a huge win for all of us. And so kind of really leaning on a rising tide lifts all boats was where our newer mayor came in back in, about 14, and said, I'm tired of having all of these silos. We're all gonna play in the sandbox together. And it really came from that control and that leadership, and like Todd said, the checkbook. He was going to be the one making decisions where some of the investments went regarding streetscape projects and sidewalks that got addressed. And so knowing that it wasn't a win for one, it was a win for all. We changed the conversation on how we approached our work.
Yeah, in almost every project, if you talk to others, there are other projects going on where frequently there are ways to leverage and for there to be multiple wins in any project. And so to look for those things. And so our community, I think, is very good at talking to one another, both at paid staff leadership levels and at those volunteer levels. Many of the projects that happen in our community are run exclusively by volunteers that just said, yeah, we need to redo that park. We're gonna go out and raise $50,000. I think we're in our third park now. What started as just somebody that thought the park needed redone. So it's not always a big plan in a big organization. That was literally one guy in the Kiwanis Club that got the rest of the Kiwanis to go, yeah, okay, we'll do that. Sure, why not? Why not? But looking for those wins together, and so by being in a room like this and talking, I know you guys have different groups that will ultimately work, but I encourage you to talk and to borrow each other's ideas and to look for the wins together, how things can work together, and if it ends up being a square peg in a round hole, then you move on, and both projects proceed, but where you can find ways for everybody to work together and to talk about that, do it, and if it doesn't fit, don't force it.
You've already somewhat alluded to this with a lot of other people being involved, but I think most people in the room, when we think about Wabash and we're around there, we think the Fords, the Honeywells. If they happen to have called Logansport home, you might have us coming to your community and talking to you. And so we say a lot of the wins is just because you have that. Like, what is your response to a community that doesn't have the Honeywells and the Fords to have these deep pockets, at least as outsiders. That's our view, I think.
Yeah.
And he knew I was going to ask this. This isn't springing me if you.
Yeah.
Yeah, we are very blessed as a community. Mark Honeywell left a legacy, but by the time I arrived, it was an under-endowed legacy. And it's no secret the Fords have been very generous within the community, and I could point out and talk extensively about the things that they've done. Especially Richard wasn't afraid to tackle a project. I remember the first time I met him, he told me about his plans, and talked to lots of people about plans, and next time I talked to him, those plans were in motion because he had a checkbook, and so he could have a plan and then just go do it. He didn't have to go ask for money, raise money. He didn't have to organize a committee. He didn't have to file a state grant. He just did it, and that really did make a difference in Wabash. The county museum, the Charlie Creek Inn, the Charlie Creek Park, the Dr. James Ford Home, the Riverwalk. Most people don't know he bought all of the property for our Riverwalk and donated it to the community. Every time a property came up, he acquired it. He had a vision. So not just a checkbook, but he also had a vision. He could have done anything with his money, and he believed in the town. So that's definitely an advantage. But a lot of the things we've been up here talking about didn't involve Honeywell money, or even in some cases, we didn't even go to the Fords for contributions to those projects. They want us to diversify that funding, so everybody doesn't look to the same place. I would say that when you have a good plan, everybody wants to be a part of a winning team, and so you'll find, I am sure in this community, there are people of means, people with resources. They might not yet be passionate about a particular project that might be developing in this room right now, but having a good plan and then being able to go out and tell that story and to think strategically about where that funding might be in an individual, might be in a corporation, might not be of the magnitude that the Fords or the Honeywells have stepped up and contributed, but you can pull together a series of smaller contributions and still move the needle and get things done. And in the case of stellar and regional cities, those were state programs that I think are doing exactly what they were designed to do in creating change in the community. And there are a number of smaller programs available that can really make a big difference. So I would say it's easy to be envious and say if, but you have to put the plan together and really figure out where that funding is. I believe that it's somewhere in this community, I'm sure of it.
And I would say the bulk of our projects, there were things that Mr. Ford did independently, which was awesome. Not all of us have 15 million laying around to redo a hotel. However, a lot of the community investment projects were done not at the hand of a large philanthropic giver. They probably contributed, but they weren't the major funder of most of the projects that you see in our creative placemaking projects and plans. They definitely contributed some, but they were not the bulk contributor. The Riverfront project was a 50-50 match. That was all local sourced through an online patronicity giving campaign that was frontiered by Wabash Marketplace, but had some support from the tourism office and other organizations. But that was locally funded through $100 donations, $25 donations, some $1,000. And so we don't want you to feel discouraged because maybe you don't know that or maybe you don't recognize that you have an actual stakeholder like a Ford, which we are blessed to have, or a Honeywell legacy. But a lot of our projects weren't funded strictly through large givers like that. It really wasn't. That's the grassroots. That's the movement behind it. Grant matches. Our local government, our city was generous over the years in helping being a funding partner. Our community foundation was a partner over the years. The tourism office is sometimes a smaller partner, but it was not just somebody just was writing one big check every time we wanted to install a mural or update a creative gathering space.
Yeah, I would say that primary funding created some assets in our community, and so we use those assets to leverage these other opportunities. And again, I would encourage you to think about what are the assets this community has. And maybe for those of you that have lived here your whole lives, it's hard to see it when they're kind of right in front of you, but there are certainly some assets within this community that can be leveraged.
Hey, we have some time for a couple questions. Yeah, Terry?
It sounds to me as though the mayor that you deal with has been there for quite a while, from the beginning of the term, and it sounds to me like you've been at Honeywell for a similar amount of time. And I wonder how much of the consistency of the administration and Honeywell along that way do you think benefits you, as opposed to a different administrator at Honeywell, a different administrator, a different mayor, a different council? I'm assuming the council must be pretty much intact as well. And I would think that consistency helps you consider, most of my other questions you've answered, by the way, but that one I wondered about, because you always have that influx, you know, and I think it gets in the way of growth a lot of times. You've been fortunate, it sounds to me like you haven't had to fight that.
Yeah, so good question and good observation. I think longevity can be positive or negative, depending on, I worry all the time about becoming that guy I never wanted to be.
Can't get rid of him.
Right.
Well, you can move here.
So the mayor actually served 12 years, and about 2 years ago, we had a new mayor, and it was a big worry what was going to happen, because it had been good, and our economic development director and our city council and our mayor all were in sync, working well together. And so it was a big worry, and it was, quite frankly, it was a great transition.
We met with them all. We met with all the candidates. You know, you and I, and at the time the chair of the Main Street organization, we had meetings with the candidates asking those types of questions.
And while it was a number of different people in the community, it was really Wabash Marketplace, I think, is the group that pulled the candidates together. Is that right? Because we had a vested interest in making sure that the next administration would carry that on. And so we got them in a room and asked them, what are your plans?
By then, though, you'd made progress, and that helps.
We had, yeah, I mean, things were headed the right direction, and there weren't just a handful of people, there were a lot of people at that point that had a vested interest in making sure that the momentum didn't get lost or headed in a different direction.
And last but not least, do you personally think that this sort of thing is better driven by an administration or by the private side? Because someone has to make the final decisions. Do you think you're better off as a whole if it's, I'm sure you want the mix, but when it comes to the final, hey, these are the great ideas versus, man, because we have a lot of great, good ideas here, like you said, that have nothing to do with one another. And I'm sure you fought that as well. Do you think it's better that the administration decides that, or the private sector? Someone like yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's the combination. I go back to the Stellar Communities planning process, pulling that plan together. It wasn't just the city plan, it wasn't just an infrastructure plan, it was really a comprehensive plan that involved a lot of different partners, and that was a great process. There were a lot of people in the room like this having conversations, and we had to sort through, that project's not gonna make the cut. It's not that it's maybe a bad project, it just doesn't fit as well as the other projects. So I think there's a combination and a balance. At the end of the day, somebody has to make the decision. In the projects we've talked about, there were a lot of different somebodies involved in that process, and in each of those, I could probably tell you who the key decision makers were driving those decisions and who the other key partners were that worked alongside. And I know that's not a very precise answer, but when you try to do something so big and so comprehensive and have all those pieces work together, you need somebody making this decision and championing it. You need somebody making the other. But at the end of the day, how do you get all those people together on the same page? And that's probably a job for the city or the county or some other organization. In the case of Wabash, it was really a collaboration. There wasn't any one group that was driving over another group. At the end of the day, the Stellar plan was a city plan, and so the mayor ultimately had to decide what made the plan. But he did tremendous work in building a coalition and collaboration, and did it successfully.
When you're looking, who's going to be responsible for maintaining the investment, whatever the investment is. So if you are going to look at doing community preparation projects, whatever that is, who's the long-term person gonna maintain it? You know, we had to ask those questions, and so sometimes that drives the answer, the final decision maker. You know, when we were going through, we like to use Stellar because it was, we might get millions and millions, but the city has to match, right? But what are we gonna do? What are we gonna do with all this money when you feel like you've got an investment and you're applying to go through this process? We talked about an amphitheater, an outdoor amphitheater at one of our historical parks located downtown. It didn't make the cut. It was a good idea. We brainstormed what it would cost to program it, what attractions we could have.
I didn't think it was a good idea.
What, you know, but somebody did. Somebody in the room thought it was a good idea. So we looked at Todd and said, how much would it cost to program? What would our attendance be?
I did the math.
And so those help make the decisions. But the initial idea of, oh my gosh, an amphitheater wouldn't be nice to sit outside and see outdoor concerts, didn't fit in our community. But it was still a good idea. We just never made it to the great idea side. Todd may not have thought so, but there are others that did. And so it came down to getting them and having a facilitator take all these ideas, prioritize. This is what we have to invest in. This is where we're going to focus. We're not going to build an amphitheater if the walkways around the park are broken down and cracked. You have to start in phases. And then you decide where to focus. But you're right, who makes those decisions? I think sometimes it comes down to who's going to have to maintain whatever the investment is. It doesn't mean that you can't have a group of volunteers. You talked a little bit about consistency. There has been some consistency, but the organization that has championed a lot of these downtown investment projects, the leadership has changed 7 times in less than 6 years.
Yeah, there's definitely been some turnover, but it's been successful. We changed our economic development director. We've merged our chamber and Main Street organizations. The city administration's changed, council members have changed, but there's an expectation of the type of leadership now that will come in, that people will work together and everybody cares who's next. It's about how we can work together. At the end of the day, if you wait though for somebody else to find the solution, it's probably not going to come, and so everybody has their piece they can do.
And the consistency, the key consistency goes back to the grassroots volunteers. Todd and I were professional hats in our community, but consistently Todd's made sure that he started to actually build the table, to start pulling people to the table to have a seat at those discussions, and that group just continued to grow. And the people sitting around that first table of dreaming, it just kept growing. That's where it comes back. That's the consistency, has been the people who have engaged the planning process, who've admitted and thought an amphitheater was a good idea and someone else didn't, and didn't pout over thinking, oh my gosh, I can't believe that Todd Minnick doesn't want an amphitheater. But moving on, amphitheater's off the list.
Doesn't sound bitter at all, does she?
Amphitheater's off the list. What are we working on? Let's go. We may not agree around that table, but when we walk out the door, we're moving our community forward, and that has to be the heart that we serve with. That's the heart that we have to serve with.
Yeah, I will say, you have to talk to each other, because I got tired of having the conversations after a board meeting or an organizational meeting or volunteer meeting in the parking lot, where people would come up, I'm so glad you said that. Well, next time say it in the meeting. It was hard to get people to say things that might make their neighbors mad. And I was the out-of-town guy, so I didn't know everybody. It's harder now, 15 years later.
Yeah. We have time for one more. Paul had a question, and then to stay on schedule, we need to move to the next thing. But Paul?
I know that you guys have really used historic preservation as an economic development tool, tourism tool, there in Wabash. I run with a volunteer organization for Logansport Landmarks. We started 3.5 years ago. We've gone from 0 to 60 in 3.5 years. But right now we're on track to generate about $3.5 million in historic preservation restoration projects going on here in town. Most of the people that we're getting to move to Logansport to take over the big house projects no one else wants to do. How do you leverage historic preservation? How do you work that into contacts with the local city government that's maybe just looking for the next shiny object?
Yeah, We were fortunate to have a landmarks office in town for a while, and then it was gone, and then there was a landmarks office in town. But even if you don't have a landmarks office in town, the assets are there. That's a touchy subject with people that don't want you to tell them what you can and can't do with your building. But at the end of the day, it sounds like you guys already have great success. Congratulations, $3.5 million is a big project, or a lot of projects. I'm not sure I have a good answer to your question.
Well, I think one of the things that Todd's forgotten that he's done, because he's done so many things, is he was adamant that we had to hold some of our building owners accountable. Does that refresh your mind yet where I'm going?
Yeah.
So our city does have an appointed historic preservation commission. He appoints seats to that help make sure that we stick to a certain set of guidelines with our historic buildings. But the other part was demolition by neglect order. If people aren't putting roofs on their buildings and they own them and they're not doing anything with them, they have to be able to be held accountable. And that was a key piece.
I may have told the mayor that I didn't care if it upset the business owners that were not doing the work, that I cared about the business owners, and if I needed to get them calling his office. And it didn't take much for him to realize that he was worried about the wrong constituency group. The people that don't want you telling them that you have to put windows in your buildings downtown, or you don't want to have to keep a roof on it, should not be the people we're worried about making happy.
I said we would be done with that one, but Mercedes, I saw you and I have a great respect of all the work you've done, so you got a question.
Well, we're blessed with a progressive city council who is interested in planning, and they put aside money for a strategic investment plan and a housing plan, which I think is very important. And how can we engage more volunteers, more input, more community input into these very important plans that are coming up?
Do you need more community input?
Always.
Really? Why? I'm not saying you don't, I'm just curious. What do you miss that you need?
I just feel like it's the same small group of people that show up all the time.
Do you want their input, or do you want them to work?
Well, maybe that's a good question.
The people who are showing up are the people that are going to put the sweat equity in now. The group will grow, the volunteer base will grow, the community suggestions and ideas will grow. But if you have the same people showing up with ideas, that sounds to me like the people who are there, they're going to roll up their sleeves, and they're the ones that are going to be helping make the change. If the community who's not giving their input except on some negative social media feed, you can't focus on that. I would say, Mayor-elect, I would say that the people who are showing up, paying attention, and wanting to work, that's your grassroots start. Where the volunteer base is now in Wabash, again, it's the winning team, right? We've had some wins over the last 10 years. It's grown, but it wasn't that big. It used to be just a handful of volunteers around a table, dreaming, building, rolling up their sleeves, doing the work, and never stopping. Plans never collect dust on our shelves, and we never stop building out. Our work is never done.
Is it that amphitheater plan?
That amphitheater plan is dead.
Hey guys, for the next 10 minutes, what we'd love for you to do is there's post-it notes like last week at your table. The one question we have for you is, what insights did this discussion spark? And I'd ask for you guys to stay around, because after 10 minutes, we're going to share the next steps for Logansport Reimagined, so you want to stay for that. And they both will be here after if you have other questions for them. But for the next 10 minutes, what insights did this presentation spark? Write them down on post-it notes, and we'll gather those in 10 minutes. So share those around your table. Let's thank these guys as we transition. They're going to stay around too, though. So. Okay, if I can just call you back real quick. One of the things we're giving away tonight, we always give away certain things just kind of memory things and motivation things. One of them at your table, hopefully you didn't sit on it, was there's a nail. Real quick, for the next 60 seconds at your table, come up with a list of all the things you can do with the nail. Does that make sense? So just, no one has to write it down, but just throw out ideas around your table. What are different things you can do with the nail?
So she's just supposed to come in before we can do the nail. Oh, there's two things? Yeah. What can we do with the nail, Anthony? No, just like that.
So you probably can come up with a pretty comprehensive list, and we don't have time to kind of see if we have 100 different ideas for nails. But here's the reality, and here's why we're giving you a nail tonight. What we thought about, Michelle and I, as we were thinking about what to give away tonight, we think nails kind of help us think of action, moving from ideas to action. But the other thing Michelle mentioned was, the reality is any project you come up with a nail, you can't do much with a nail alone. Like most of the things you can do with nails, you need a lot of them. You need other tools. No one has a hammer at their table. You need boards maybe to put boards together with nails. But the reality is as we move into the next phase of Logansport Reimagined, we want to move from all this learning to actually starting to do things. But just like nails, it can't just be one or two of us doing things. As you heard from our team from Wabash, there's a need for some comprehensive groups, some cohesion, a lot of different people at the table, and growing that group. And so that's kind of what we're going to talk about. The second thing at your table is a glue stick. And the reason why we want to give you that is one of the languages that I use quite a bit is Greek. And one of the most unique words in Greek is the word kalao. And kalao is a word that, like, when we translate into English, it'll say, like, go walk beside that person. That's kind of the best translation we come up with in English. But if you're someone who knows language, you know that some words don't translate that well. The word kalao literally is the root word for glue. That in Greek, at least, just like when I shared the Mozambican proverb a month ago now, this idea is if we're going to walk together, if we're going to journey together, it's more intentional than just saying, let's take this trip together. There's something like cementing ourselves to the journey, gluing ourselves, saying we're going to go together as a team in this. Go in that direction does not mean you go. To go means we go together. I shared a month ago, that's how they do it in Africa. No one gives you directions. They join you in the journey, and they make sure that together we get to the destination, because the process sometimes is just as important as the destination, because as we learn the process, not only can we get to one destination, we get to another and another and another. And the hope of Logansport Reimagined is that we will do these things together, learn a process, build momentum, and just like they shared in Wabash, small projects become bigger projects, become more small projects, become more bigger projects, and you just keep the ball rolling and rolling. So Logansport Reimagined, as we said, is about creating a uniquely better community. We shared, if you haven't been here before, there are these 5 neighborhood districts, and we realize they can be subdivided even more, but we're going to start with these teams of 5. And so the next step is that if you haven't already thought about this, that you will join a team. And what that means is, some of you, it might be the neighborhood you live in, the neighborhood you care about because you have a business there, a neighborhood you care about because it's the neighborhood you grew up in. But we would like you to self-identify a team you'd like to join. And for the next several months, what it's going to look like is your team together. We're not going to tell you how you're going to do this. You guys as a team can organically and kind of grassroots led kind of decide how this will look. But we learned about engaging. How do we learn more about what's happening in our community? How do we listen? How do we get other people involved and give them a seat at the table? So you're going to come up with a couple ideas, 2 really. One of them is that each neighborhood district is going to have a place at the fair. We'll reserve the spot, like Monday is going to be neighborhood district 1, Tuesday 2, but you're going to have a platform at the fair in July where you can come up with an idea to creatively engage. Sean talked a lot about different ideas last week about whether it's like playing cornhole and listening to people, whether it's doing postcards like we did, but how do we get more people involved in listening and learning? And then there might be another idea that you guys have in the coming weeks, like you want to do a cookout in your neighborhood, or you want to do a porch party, invite over some people and just kind of listen to more people. But the next step is saying, how do we put some of those ideas into practice and get more people involved, and how do you get your team working together in sharing ideas and listening. Then the next step is going to be to do some small projects. Things as simple as, there was one neighborhood district that met on that first night 3 weeks ago and already was like, oh, you can borrow my tractor and you can borrow my bush eater and we're going to clean this lot. We're going to, I mean, they already have it done. Like but there's certain small kind of wins we can have that don't take a lot of time or energy or effort, but you can gather together even a small group of 10, 15 concerned people and kind of tackle some of these. And then finally, this is all leading towards, by Labor Day, your neighborhood district coming up with a proposal for a bigger project that we will help even fund to make it happen. Does that make sense? And so, what we'd love for you to think about is in 2 weeks, Tuesday, May 22nd, once again at 6:30, there's reminder sheets on your table in yellow. On the back, it shares briefly what I just shared. But if you'd like to come back, if you'd like to join this, we're going to send out an email invitation to everyone that's been a part of this. There was 130 at the initial kickoff and a different group of 60 to 70 every week since. We want as many of you as possible at that event on Tuesday, May 22nd. We will answer questions that you might have about the process, but that is what this process looks like. Taking what we learned in the past 3 weeks and now starting to say, how do we build these teams that will start actually doing this in our community, start not only reimagining Logansport, but helping put in the work to make Logansport the place that all of us want to live, work, and play, if that makes sense. So if you're already in and you're saying, like, well, we've just been waiting for what's next, there's green sheets of paper in the center of your table. If you write down your name, what neighborhood district you're going to be involved in, the goal is that we'll have teams that will be as big as they need to be, that every team we were hoping for originally was going to be at least 3. We think we'll definitely hit 3 with each neighborhood district. But if there are other people you think need to be at the table right from the beginning, please invite them to come May 22nd, because that's when your teams are going to meet. And you guys are going to decide how you meet next, how you communicate with one another. Michelle and I and the rest of the HCI original team will be here to be your resources and coaches and help you along. But the next step of this, many of you have been asking, is actually doing what we've been hearing about. Putting into place what is make these other communities uniquely better and helping create our community into a uniquely better community. Does that make sense? Any questions? Because we do have a couple minutes here about like what we're asking. So 2 weeks, we're going to gather together, talk a little bit more details about that general idea, but it's about engaging more in your neighborhood districts, doing some projects, planning for maybe even several bigger projects you kind of want to do one after another that can start building momentum and start actually creating the type of community that we want. So if you want to right now, feel free to grab a green sheet of paper and fill out your name and information. We'll use that to kind of communicate with you. Our Wabash team is right here. They're going to be leaving soon. So if any of you have questions for them, you want to catch them on their way out, please do that. If you have any questions, Michelle's in the back. She has all the answers. Peggy's next to her. She has all the money. No. And so feel free to ask questions, but we'd love for you, remember, to invite others, get more involved. We need more nails, more puzzle pieces, more threads so that the fabric can be strong. And feel free, since you have time before you leave, if you haven't already, fill out that orange sheet of paper. One of the things we're going to do in 2 weeks is share the information you've been gathering and share it back with you, because we've been kind of gathering lots of data without you even knowing it sometimes. So feel free to write on that orange sheet of paper the community you most love, why you love it, and feel free to leave it, and we'll gather it later. So, yep.
Could you put the neighborhood map up again?
Yes, we can. We can even have it in the back. We have a big hard copy we can throw it in an easel for you if it's hard to see this one. So, yep. So that it is. We'll leave it up, and then so you know which one that you might self-assess. And if you need help knowing where your street is, feel free to see one of us, and we can help you figure that out. So thank you so very much for being here. If you have any questions, see us. Have a great evening.